It was midday when the desert sun glared mercilessly over the Valley of Kings. Seth Omori shielded his eyes as he stood before the excavation site, a place buried for millennia beneath whispers of time. A scholar of ancient Egypt and a doctoral candidate at Cairo University, Seth had spent years chasing riddles etched into crumbling papyrus and forgotten monuments. But today was different. "Are you ready, Omori?" barked Dr. Khafra, the lead archaeologist, wiping his sweat-drenched brow. "Yes, sir," Seth replied, heart pounding. A few weeks earlier, a seismic tremor had revealed cracks in the eastern wall of an old tomb, exposing a strange doorway untouched by tools or time. Seth had begged to lead the inspection. Dr. Khafra relented, though only after Seth agreed to document everything meticulously. Seth climbed down into the shadowy depths. The limestone walls here glistened faintly, almost as if the ancient masons had infused them with some hidden energy. He stepped into the newly uncovered chamber, and froze. The room was immaculate. Perfectly sealed. No dust, no decay. At the center stood an obsidian pedestal supporting a smooth, spherical artifact that pulsed softly with an unearthly light. Seth's fingers twitched as he approached. The sphere thrummed, faintly alive. As Seth drew closer, the world seemed to dim, and then, "You have heard the call." The voice rang in his mind, clear and powerful. Seth staggered back, clutching his temples. What was that?" he gasped, staring at the orb. But the sphere only pulsed again. That night, Seth sat in his study, unable to shake the voice from his mind. The artifact now rested under lock and key at the university's lab, but its presence lingered, buzzing in his thoughts like a swarm of unseen insects. He scribbled furiously in his journal, trying to make sense of it all. Telepathic communication, it was impossible. But ancient Egyptians had believed in divine whispers, messages from gods. What if they weren't gods at all? As Seth pondered, his pen slipped, and the ink stained a series of strange symbols on the page. He blinked. He didn't remember writing that. Suddenly, the room darkened. A hum filled the air, rising to an almost deafening crescendo. Seth pressed his hands to his ears, but it was no use. Then, silence. Seth opened his eyes and gasped. He was no longer in his apartment. Around him stretched an endless horizon of white sand beneath a blood-red sky. Towering structures unlike anything on Earth loomed in the distance. At the center of it all stood a being cloaked in shadows. Its shape shimmered, its outline impossible to fix. "Who are you?" Seth whispered. The being's voice thundered in his mind. "We are the Forgotten Ones. The Architects. The Overseers. And you, Seth Omori, are chosen." "Chosen for what?" "To restore the connection and reveal the truth. Humanity must awaken. The balance has tipped." Before Seth could reply, he felt a wrenching sensation, like he was being dragged backward through a funnel of light. When he awoke, he was on his study floor, drenched in sweat. The symbols he'd scrawled earlier burned brightly on the page, almost as if alive. Seth's research intensified. He pored over every text he could find, scouring myths about celestial visitors and gods who communicated without speech. His obsession grew, so much so that even Dr. Khafra noticed. "You look terrible, Omori," Khafra muttered one morning. "Take a day off before you drop dead in a tomb." Seth ignored him. His nights were filled with vivid visions of impossible landscapes and cryptic messages. Each time, the shadowed being spoke of a balance disrupted, a warning. 3 weeks later, a breakthrough came. Seth discovered a passage referencing a lost pharaoh, Neferkare-Sinu, meaning the telepathic pharaoh. Neferkare-Sinu was said to have ruled briefly before mysteriously disappearing from the annals of history. Legend spoke of his communion with the stars. The text hinted at a second chamber hidden beneath a pyramid. The Chamber of the Whisperers, it was called. Seth knew he had to find it. The desert night was eerily quiet as Seth led a small group of trusted students to the Pyramid of Saqqara. He couldn't risk involving Dr. Khafra or the authorities, not until he knew what lay below. "We shouldn't be here," muttered Layla, one of Seth's closest confidants. "I know. But we're so close," Seth replied, his voice filled with conviction. They crawled through forgotten passageways and half-collapsed tunnels until they reached a wall etched with faint markings, symbols identical to those Seth had scribbled weeks earlier. Seth pressed his hand to the wall, and the stone trembled beneath his touch. With a deep rumble, the wall slid away, revealing a staircase spiraling into darkness. The group descended cautiously. At the bottom, they found a colossal chamber. Its walls were carved with glowing hieroglyphs that seemed to writhe and shift, telling stories older than time. At the center of the room lay a sarcophagus, unlike any Seth had seen before. It was made of a material that shimmered like liquid metal, pulsing softly with the same rhythm as the orb. Seth approached, his breath shallow. "Open it," whispered a voice in his mind. Seth hesitated but couldn't resist. He slid the lid off. Inside lay a figure adorned in ceremonial gold, its features unnervingly human, yet other. The figure's eyes, though closed, radiated an energy Seth could feel in his bones. "It's him," Seth whispered. "Neferke seen you." The chamber shuddered. The hieroglyphs flared to life, and the figure's eyes snapped open. Seth stumbled back as the Pharaoh sat up, his gaze locking onto Seth's. "You have restored the connection," Neferke seen you said, his voice echoing in their minds. Seth and his team stood frozen as Neferke seen you rose. His movements were fluid, unnaturally precise. "Do not be afraid," the Pharaoh said. "I am the last of the Whisperers. You have freed me." What are you?" Seth managed to stammer. The Pharaoh's gaze softened. "A bridge between your kind and the architects, those you call aliens." Layla gasped. "You mean, they're real?" Neferke seen you nodded. "They taught humanity the art of telepathy and shared their knowledge to guide your evolution. But not all architects agreed. Some wished to manipulate, to enslave." He gestured to the hieroglyphs, which now depicted a great war in the skies. "Those who sought balance were betrayed. I was chosen to guard their secrets, but the manipulators imprisoned me. For millennia, they have shaped your history in the shadows, steering you toward chaos." Seth's mind raced. "Why now? Why have I found you?" "Because the manipulators have returned. They whisper to those in power, bending humanity's destiny to serve their own ends. The balance must be restored." Neferke seen you extended his hand toward Seth. "Come. See what must be done." Seth hesitated before stepping forward. The Pharaoh's fingertips brushed Seth's temple, and suddenly, Seth's mind exploded with visions. He saw empires rise and fall, guided by unseen hands. Wars ignited for no reason other than chaos. Leaders manipulated, inventions suppressed, knowledge buried. Humanity's progress, though staggering, had always been curated, twisted to fit a design. Seth screamed as the visions overwhelmed him. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. "You understand now," Neferke seen you said. "They must be stopped. But I cannot act alone." Seth looked up, his resolve hardening. "Tell me what to do." Neferke seen you explained the orb Seth had found. It was an ancient conduit, a key to amplify telepathic communication across vast distances. The manipulators had used it to project their influence, and now Seth had reactivated it. "You must destroy their link," the Pharaoh said. "It is hidden within the Great Pyramid itself." Layla interjected, terrified. "Destroy the pyramid? You're insane." Neferke seen you turned to her. "Not the pyramid, what lies beneath it?" Seth nodded. "I'll do it." "Not alone," Layla said firmly. "You'll need help." Neferke seen you raised a hand, and the orb materialized before them, floating in midair. "It will guide you. The manipulators will sense our plan. Be swift." The team raced to the Great Pyramid under cover of night. Seth led the way, guided by the orb's soft glow. As they descended through hidden shafts, the air grew heavy, oppressive. "Something's down here," Layla whispered. They reached a cavernous chamber deep beneath the pyramid's foundations. At its center stood a massive crystalline structure pulsing with dark energy. "This is it," Seth said. "The manipulators conduit." But before they could act, the shadows moved. Out of the darkness emerged humanoid figures, their forms shifting like smoke, their eyes burning with malevolence. "You cannot stop us," their voices hissed in unison, reverberating in Seth's mind. Neferke seen you's voice boomed in response. "Stand firm, Seth. Destroy the conduit." Seth gripped the orb and sprinted toward the crystal. The shadow figures swarmed, their touch freezing his skin, their whispers tearing at his resolve. Layla screamed as one latched onto her, but she fought back, swinging a torch through the darkness. With a final cry, Seth hurled the orb at the crystal. The impact shattered the silence. A blinding light erupted, and the chamber trembled violently. When Seth awoke, he was lying on the sand beneath the stars. The pyramid loomed silently behind him, but something felt different, lighter, as if the air itself had been freed of some unseen weight. Layla groaned nearby, stirring to consciousness. Did we win?" she murmured. Seth sat up, his thoughts clear for the first time in weeks. "I think so. The link is broken." Neferke seen you's voice echoed faintly in Seth's mind. "This is only the beginning. The manipulators are weakened, but they are not gone. Guard the truth, Seth Omori. Humanity's fate now rests in your hands." Seth looked out across the desert, his heart filled with purpose. The world had been manipulated for too long. It was time to reclaim humanity's destiny. And he knew the fight was far from over. Weeks had passed since Seth Omori shattered the crystal beneath the Great Pyramid and severed the manipulator's link. Cairo buzzed with rumors of the mysterious tremors, but the truth remained hidden. Seth and Layla had returned to their daily lives, or so it seemed. But neither of them could forget. The whispers hadn't stopped. Seth sat at his desk, staring at his journal. The symbols he'd once scribbled in madness were beginning to make sense. They weren't just warnings, they were coordinates. He flipped the page and ran his fingers over the markings. Locations around the globe. Seth. He turned to find Layla standing in the doorway of his study. She looked pale, her usual fire dimmed. "They're still here," she whispered. Seth froze. "What do you mean?" Layla lowered her voice. "I've been hearing them. In my dreams. In my head. The whispers are growing louder, Seth." Seth swallowed hard. He had felt it too, a faint pressure at the edge of his mind, like someone trying to push their way in. "The manipulators, they're still reaching for us." Layla nodded. "And I think they're angry." Before Seth could respond, the air shifted. The room grew colder. Papers fluttered as an unseen force swept through the space. A voice, low, guttural, and cruel, filled their minds. "You think you've won? Foolish mortals. You only severed one thread. We are infinite." The windows rattled. Seth and Layla clutched their heads, the pressure unbearable. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Seth gasped for air. "They're retaliating," he said, his voice shaking. "We're not done yet." Layla steadied herself. "Then we need to act. Now." Seth spread his notes across the table, revealing a map of the world with red circles marking ancient sites, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, Angkor Wat, and others. "They aren't just random monuments," Seth explained. "They're part of a network." "A network of what?" Layla asked. "Power. The manipulators used these sites as conduits, just like the chamber beneath the Great Pyramid. They amplified telepathic energy across the globe, influencing entire civilizations." Layla pointed at one circle in particular. "What's this one? It doesn't look like a famous site." Seth leaned closer. "This is in Turkey. It's near Göbekli Tepe, but it's different. Hidden. I think this might be the central node. If we can find it, we can end their influence for good." Layla exhaled sharply. "And if we're wrong?" Seth looked her in the eye. "Then the world remains theirs." 2 days later, Seth and Layla stood beneath a brooding sky in southeastern Turkey. The excavation team they'd hired worked quickly to uncover what Seth believed to be the entrance to a lost underground complex. "It's deeper than Göbekli Tepe," Seth muttered, watching as the last layer of earth was removed. Before them, a massive stone doorway etched with glowing symbols appeared. The same symbols that haunted Seth's journal. The workers backed away nervously. Layla whispered, "They're scared." "They should be," Seth replied. The door rumbled open, revealing a spiraling descent into darkness. Seth grabbed a torch and turned to Layla. "You don't have to come." She smirked, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "Like I'd let you stumble into an ancient death trap alone." Together, they descended into the abyss. The air grew thick with an unnatural stillness. The deeper they went, the more the walls seemed to hum, alive with power. Seth felt a strange pull in his chest, as though something was guiding him. Finally, they entered a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadows. At the center lay an altar of polished black stone, surrounded by floating orbs, smaller versions of the one Seth had found in the pyramid. Layla stepped forward cautiously. "What is this place?" Before Seth could answer, the torches flickered. The shadows writhed. "They're here," Seth whispered. The chamber darkened as smoke-like figures emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes fixed on Seth and Layla. "You were warned," the voices hissed. "You meddle with forces beyond your comprehension." Seth gritted his teeth. "You've manipulated humanity long enough." A chilling laugh echoed through the room. "Humanity is weak. It craves order. We provide it." One of the shadow figures lunged. Layla screamed, raising a torch, but the flame sputtered and died. Seth grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the altar. "Nefer Senu said the orbs amplify their power." Seth shouted. "If we destroy them." A shadow crashed into Seth, sending him sprawling across the stone floor. Cold tendrils wrapped around his limbs, draining his strength. The figure loomed over him, its face shifting between alien and human features. "You will join us," it whispered. Seth fought against the pressure in his mind. "No. I won't let you." From across the room, Layla's voice rang out. "Seth. The orb, focus on the orb." Seth turned his gaze toward the largest floating sphere above the altar. He closed his eyes and reached for it, not with his hands, but with his mind. The shadow figure roared as Seth's thoughts connected with the orb. His head felt like it might split open, but he held on, pushing his will into the artifact. Enough. The orb cracked. A shockwave erupted through the chamber, flinging the shadow figures backward. The walls trembled, and the orbs shattered one by one. The shadows screamed as they disintegrated, their forms unraveling like smoke in the wind. Seth collapsed, gasping for breath. Layla rushed to his side. "You did it. They're gone." But Seth wasn't so sure. They emerged from the ruins at dawn, the sky painted in hues of gold and crimson. Seth carried a shard of the orb, its surface still warm to the touch. "It's not over," Seth said quietly. "I can feel it." Layla frowned. "What do you mean?" "We destroyed the orbs. Seth stared out at the horizon. These ruins were just part of the network. There are more. And the manipulators, they aren't defeated. They're regrouping. A familiar voice echoed faintly in Seth's mind, Nefer Ka Senu. The battle has only begun. The manipulators are clever. They will adapt. You must prepare, Seth Omori. Humanity's fate is not yet secure. Seth clenched the shard in his hand. Then we'll stop them again. Layla placed a hand on his shoulder. We're in this together. As the first rays of sunlight illuminated the ruins, Seth knew their journey was far from over. The manipulators were ancient, powerful, and relentless. But humanity had something they couldn't control, hope. And Seth vowed to fight, no matter the cost. The shard burned cold in Seth Omori's hand as he stood atop a crumbling rooftop overlooking Cairo. Beneath him, the city bustled, unaware of the invisible war that was unfolding. Layla stood beside him, her brow furrowed as she scanned the horizon. Do you feel it? Seth whispered. Layla nodded. It's getting louder. The whispers, soft at first, had returned, like a storm gathering at the edge of their minds. Only now, the voices weren't isolated to dark chambers or ancient ruins. They were everywhere. A chilling realization had dawned on Seth after destroying the orbs in Turkey. The manipulators were no longer confined to ancient networks. They had spread like roots into modern cities. Humans, unknowingly, were amplifying them. They're using us, Seth muttered. Our technology, our infrastructure. We've built the perfect tools for them to grow stronger. Layla looked pale. If they've adapted to the modern world. Seth finished the thought. Then ancient answers won't be enough. At that moment, Seth's phone buzzed. The screen flickered erratically, the device glitching as though a pulse of energy surged through it. A voice, unnaturally smooth and mechanical, emerged from the speaker. You cannot hide. We are inside everything. The phone screen shattered in Seth's hand. Layla gasped. They've already begun, Seth said grimly. We need help. Seth and Layla flew to London, where a name from Layla's past had resurfaced. Dr. Elias Grant, a rogue historian who had been researching telepathic networks years before Seth even found the hidden chamber. Grant's papers were dismissed as conspiracy theories, but Layla believed he had stumbled too close to the truth. The two found him in a cluttered basement beneath a second-hand bookstore, his thin frame hunched over an array of monitors. You're late, Grant said without looking up. Layla frowned. You knew we were coming? Grant smirked and tapped his temple. They're screaming at me too, dear. Hard not to hear the chatter these days. Seth stepped forward. We think they've adapted. They're using technology now, signals, systems. How do we stop them? Elias snorted. Stop them? You don't stop a storm, you endure it. That's not good enough, Seth shot back. Elias hesitated, his sardonic mask slipping. There is one thing. A signal strong enough to sever their influence. A counter-frequency. The problem is, the key to crafting it is buried in the last place you'd want to go. Where? Layla asked. Elias looked them both in the eye. The manipulator's origin site. The place where they first arrived on Earth. According to Grant's research, the origin site lay deep within the deserts of Sudan, in a region where sandstorms had concealed an entire crater for millennia. Seth, Layla, and Elias embarked on the perilous journey, braving scorching winds and shifting dunes. Days later, they stood at the edge of the massive crater. The walls sloped steeply downward, exposing something that didn't belong, a colossal, metallic structure half buried in rock and sand. It hummed faintly, alive despite its age. Elias whistled low. It's not from Earth. Never was. Seth felt the pressure building in his head as they descended into the crater. They don't want us here. Layla gripped her pack. Let's make it worth the trouble. At the crater's center, the alien structure revealed a massive entrance, an archway lined with glowing symbols Seth recognized from the pyramid and ruins. Beyond the door was a vast cavern of technology and stone fused together. They built this, Elias said in awe. A factory for their influence. Suddenly, the cavern vibrated, and a booming voice echoed in their heads. You trespass in our sanctuary. The shadows appeared again, dozens of them, spilling out from the walls, their glowing eyes fixed on the intruders. Go! Seth yelled. They ran toward the heart of the structure, where an immense pillar of dark crystal pulsed with energy. This, Elias had explained, was the Rift Core, the very thing that allowed the manipulators to infiltrate Earth's telepathic networks. We have to disrupt it, Layla shouted. Seth approached the core, the air thick with malevolent energy. He reached into his pack and pulled out the shard from Turkey. It trembled in his hand, reacting to the core's presence. The shard, Elias said, wide-eyed. It's a key. It can collapse the rift. Will it destroy them? Layla asked. Elias hesitated. It'll weaken them, maybe buy us time. But destroy them? No. They're too deeply rooted. Seth looked at Layla. It's a start. As Seth approached the rift core, the shadows surged toward him. Layla and Elias fended them off with torches and makeshift explosives, but they were outnumbered. The voices grew deafening. Join us. Resistance is futile. Seth fell to his knees, clutching the shard to his chest. He could feel their pull, the temptation to let go, to submit to their control. Seth! Layla screamed. A memory flashed in his mind, the voice of Nefer Ka-Senu. Humanity's strength lies in its defiance. With a roar, Seth pushed himself forward and slammed the shard into the rift core. The cavern erupted in light. The shadows screamed, their forms disintegrating into streaks of smoke. The core cracked, pulsing violently. Seth stumbled back as the structure began to collapse. Run! Elias shouted. They sprinted toward the entrance as the cavern crumbled behind them. Sand poured into the crater, burying the alien machinery once more. The three emerged into the blinding sunlight, gasping for breath. Behind them, the ground heaved and settled. The rift core, and its terrible influence, was sealed. For now. Back in Cairo, Seth sat alone on a rooftop, watching the city below. The whispers were gone, replaced by an uneasy silence. Layla joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. It's quiet, she said softly. Seth nodded. Too quiet. The core is sealed, but Elias was right. We didn't destroy them. They're still out there, hidden, waiting. Layla sipped her tea. Then we'll be ready for them. Seth pulled the shard from his pocket, its surface now dull and cracked. They underestimated us before. They won't make that mistake again. Layla smiled faintly. And neither will we. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Seth felt the weight of what lay ahead. The manipulators were ancient, relentless, and adaptable. But so was humanity. And Seth Omori had only just begun to fight. Weeks had passed since Seth Omori, Layla, and Elias sealed the rift core in Sudan. The world felt off, like a vast engine humming with hidden energy. The silence wasn't peace, it was a void. Seth could feel it, pulling at the edges of his mind. It wasn't over. In a dim-lit cafe in Cairo, Seth sat across from Elias, maps and papers spread between them. Layla scanned the room with caution. They trusted no one now, telepathic manipulation could come from anywhere. Elias tapped a brittle page of an ancient manuscript. There's a pattern here. The rift core was one node, but it wasn't their first. Layla frowned. Their first what? Their entry point, Elias said. The place they broke through, where their influence first bled into our world. If the rift core was a factory, this place, wherever it is, could be the doorway itself. Seth leaned in. Do you know where it is? Elias hesitated, then pulled out a hand-drawn map. Antarctica. The word hung heavy in the air. Layla blinked. That's impossible. Nothing survives there. Elias smiled grimly. Nothing human. But them? They thrive in the shadows. And the cold, that's where it all began. Seth's knuckles turned white around his teacup. Then we go there. If we find the doorway, if we conceal it, we can end this once and for all. Elias's expression darkened. Just remember, the deeper we dig, the more dangerous they become. A chartered flight carried them across the southern hemisphere, beyond the limits of human civilization. Seth gazed out the window at the endless white, an ocean of ice broken only by jagged ridges. Antarctica. The last frontier. Or the first battleground. Elias tapped Seth's shoulder. Our destination isn't on modern maps. This, he pointed at an old parchment overlaying their GPS, was charted centuries ago by explorers who never returned. A cavern beneath the ice, sealed and forgotten. Layla adjusted her parka. Or guarded. By the time they landed at an abandoned research station, the temperature had plummeted below freezing. The cold gnawed at their bones as they trekked toward the coordinates. Seth led the way, guided by something beyond sight, a pull at the center of his mind. Do you feel that? Layla whispered, her breath misting the air. Seth nodded. They know we're coming. The three reached a yawning fissure in the ice. It stretched deep into darkness, its walls lined with frost-covered symbols. The same symbols Seth had seen in the pyramids, in Sudan, and in his visions. This is it, Elias muttered, all creeping into his voice. The origin site. Without another word, they descended. The cavern beneath the ice was colossal, a cathedral of alien design. Black stone and strange metallic veins jutted from the ice as though the earth itself had tried, and failed, to bury the structure. At the far end stood the gateway, an enormous arch carved from a material that seemed to drink the light around it. Symbols glowed faintly on its surface, pulsing like a heartbeat. Elias's voice shook. It's active. Layla stepped back. How? We sealed the rift core. Seth approached the gateway, feeling the air vibrate around him. This was never about a single node. The rift core was one thread. This is the loom. From the darkness, a voice slithered into their minds. You cannot stop the inevitable. The shadows emerged. This time, they were different, denser, more defined, like silhouettes of ancient beings with too many limbs and too many eyes. Elias stumbled back. They're evolving. One of the shadows stepped forward, towering over Seth. Its voice boomed, resonating through the cavern. You severed one root, but the tree remains. We are eternal. We are the Harbingers. Seth raised his voice. Why Earth? Why us? The Harbinger's form rippled, its many eyes turning crimson. Because your kind is malleable. Perfect vessels. Through you, we transcend worlds. The gateway pulsed violently. Energy surged toward the arch, and Seth realized with horror what was happening. They're opening it, he whispered. Layla grabbed his arm. We need to shut it down. Elias fumbled with his pack, pulling out explosives. We can bury the whole thing. Collapse the cavern. Seth's eyes darted to the gateway. No. It won't be enough. They'll find another way. We need to stop them at the source. Layla's eyes widened. What are you saying? Seth turned to the arch, the symbols burning in his mind. I think I can go through. I can follow them to their world. Elias's face paled. That's suicide. Or it's the only chance we've got, Seth countered. If I can disrupt their power there, it'll sever their connection to us for good. The Harbinger's voice echoed, mocking him. You will not survive the crossing. Seth stepped forward, determination hardening his features. We'll see. Elias and Layla worked frantically to set charges around the cavern as Seth approached the gateway. The closer he got, the more he felt his mind unraveling, like his thoughts were being pulled apart and reassembled. Seth, Layla shouted. You don't have to do this. Seth turned, a faint smile on his lips. We've come too far to turn back now. He clutched the shard, the last remnant of the rift core, in his palm. It pulsed with faint energy, a fragile weapon against an unimaginable enemy. The gateway roared to life, its surface becoming a swirling void of darkness and light. Seth took one final breath and stepped through. The world shattered. Seth awoke to a sky of black fire and an earth that pulsed like flesh beneath his feet. The air was heavy with ash, and twisted spires loomed in the distance, an alien world, alive and aware of his presence. The whispers were deafening here, not voices but a chorus of thoughts, endless and overwhelming. Seth staggered forward, clutching the shard. You are alone, mortal. The Harbingers emerged from the air itself, shadows given form, towering and grotesque. Seth raised the shard, its faint glow barely piercing the gloom. You're wrong, he said, his voice steady. I'm not alone. Humanity stands with me. He drove the shard into the ground. A blinding pulse of light erupted, spreading outward in waves. The Harbingers screamed, their forms flickering as the energy tore through the realm. Seth fell to his knees, his vision blurring. The shard cracked and shattered, releasing its final surge of power. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the world began to collapse. Layla stood at the edge of the gateway, her heart pounding. The cavern shook violently as the charges detonated, chunks of ice and stone falling from above. Seth! She screamed. The gateway flickered, its surface destabilizing. Just as it collapsed, a figure stumbled through, Seth, bruised and blooded, but alive. Layla caught him as the cavern imploded, the gateway vanishing into nothingness. Together, they scrambled out into the frozen wasteland, the earth rumbling beneath them. When they finally reached safety, Seth collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. You did it, Layla whispered. Seth shook his head weakly. Not yet. I stopped them here, but there are more. Other gateways. Other worlds. Elias, battered but alive, approached them. You mean this isn't over? Seth looked up at the horizon, where the sun rose over the icy expanse. Not yet. But we know how to fight them now. And as long as we're still standing, they haven't won. Seth Omori stared at the flickering fire in their makeshift base on the outskirts of Cairo. His bruises had healed, but the exhaustion lingered. The Antarctic gateway was destroyed, but the Harbinger's whispers returned like echoes of a nightmare. Layla, crouched nearby, studied a set of coordinates Elias had decrypted from fragments of alien symbols recovered before the cavern's collapse. These marks suggest another gateway, Elias muttered, pacing nervously. He glanced at Seth. But this one's different. Seth raised an eyebrow. How? Elias exhaled sharply. It's not a doorway they created. It's one they found, an ancient Harbinger prison. Something, or someone, locked them here, long before humans existed. Layla frowned. Are you saying they were trapped on Earth? Elias nodded. The gateways we've seen so far are their attempts to escape. They've been imprisoned here, feeding off humanity to regain their strength. Seth's blood ran cold. And now we've been helping them break free. Elias slammed his fist on the table. Unintentionally, yes. Every time we disrupt their gateways, they adapt. Destroying the rift core in Sudan, collapsing the Antarctic gate, all we've done is force them to seek another way out. Layla's voice was soft but resolute. Then what's our next move? Elias slid a worn map across the table, his hands trembling. We go to the oldest gateway. The first one. The Harbinger's prison. Seth stared at the map. At its center, scrawled in Elias's unmistakable hand, was a single word, Mesopotamia. The trio traveled under false identities, wary of who, or what, might be watching. Seth felt it in the air now, something was hunting them, a presence he couldn't see but could feel in his bones. It wasn't just the Harbingers anymore. Humans, seduced by telepathic influence, had begun acting as their agents, whispering loyalists spreading chaos. As their plane touched down in Baghdad, Elias shared the grim reality. The Harbinger prison lies beneath the Tigris River, hidden for millennia. Flooding the area may have been intentional, someone tried to bury them. Seth narrowed his eyes. So how do we reach it? Elias adjusted his glasses. There's a dig site nearby, archaeologists have been pulling up fragments of an ancient civilization. They think it's Sumerian, but... He hesitated. Some of the artifacts match the alien symbols. They're close, but they don't know what they're waking. Layla paled. The Harbingers are manipulating them. Seth clenched his fists. Then we stop the dig. We seal the prison. For good. Elias looked uneasy. I'm not sure it's that simple. Seth stared at him. Why not? Elias swallowed. Because if we seal it, we might destroy Earth's only chance to end this forever. The dig site buzzed with activity. Archaeologists and heavy equipment were everywhere, unknowingly unearthing their doom. Seth, Layla, and Elias infiltrated the camp under the cover of night. The alien whispers grew louder as they descended into the exposed tunnels beneath the riverbed, dark passages of stone and metal, slick with moisture. Seth paused as a wave of dizziness hit him. They're close. Elias flicked on his flashlight, illuminating a massive chamber ahead. At its center stood an ancient obelisk, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed faintly, as if alive. Chains of black stone extended outward, tethering the obelisk to the ground, bindings older than humanity. Layla's voice was barely a whisper. This is it. The prison. Seth approached the obelisk cautiously, feeling its pull in his mind. Whispers turned to roars as a booming voice filled the chamber. You have come at last. The Harbinger emerged, its shadowy form vast, coiling upward like a living storm. But this time, it wasn't alone. Around the chamber, humans, archaeologists and dig workers, stood motionless, their eyes glowing faintly. Elias gasped. They are possessed. The Harbinger's voice thundered. You seek to destroy us, but we are eternal. Release our bonds, and you shall share in our power. Seth gripped the shard of alien crystal, what remained of his weapon from Antarctica. Its faint glow offered little comfort. Layla turned to Elias. You said sealing this could cost us our chance to win. What did you mean? Elias hesitated, sweat beading his brow. The prison's bindings are a weapon, one forged by whoever imprisoned them. If we can reactivate it, we might not just trap the Harbingers, we could destroy them. Seth nodded. Then that's what we do. The Harbinger's form shifted, its shadowy arms lashing out. Humans under its control surged forward, eyes empty, attacking like puppets on strings. Hold them off! Seth yelled, sprinting toward the obelisk. Layla and Elias fought desperately to fend off the possessed workers, their torch flames and makeshift weapons barely slowing the horde. The chamber shook as the Harbinger screamed, shadows rippling across the walls. You cannot win. Your world is ours. Seth reached the obelisk, his mind assaulted by visions, worlds consumed by darkness, civilizations reduced to ash. The Harbingers had done this before. They would do it again. Gripping the shard, Seth pressed it against the obelisk's surface. The symbols flared brighter, chains vibrating as if awakening. No! The Harbinger roared. The ground trembled violently. The humans froze mid-attack, their eyes flickering as the Harbinger's control wavered. Layla shouted over the chaos. It's working, Seth. Sweat dripped from Seth's brow as he focused all his will, forcing the shard's energy into the obelisk. The chains began to retract, pulling tighter around the Harbinger's form. You cannot defeat us. We are infinite. Seth gritted his teeth. Not anymore. The obelisk exploded with light, blinding them all. The Harbinger's scream filled the chamber as its form fractured, shadows being dragged back into the obelisk's bindings. The humans collapsed, freed from its influence. Elias scrambled to Seth's side. You did it. It's sealing them. But Seth wasn't listening. His gaze was locked on the obelisk. The symbols had changed, rearranging themselves into a message, a warning. Layla limped over, panting. Seth? What is it? Seth's voice was hollow. This isn't over. The prison is holding only one of them. There are others, and they are waking. Elias paled. Then we just unleashed something far worse. The chamber began to rumble as cracks spiderwebbed through the walls. Water gushed in, flooding the tunnels. Time to go. Layla shouted. They scrambled to the surface as the dig site collapsed behind them, the river swallowing the prison once more. Back in Cairo, the trio regrouped in their safe house. Elias worked feverishly at his desk, decoding fragments of alien symbols copied from the obelisk before the collapse. Seth sat in silence, staring at the shard, now dull, its energy spent. Layla broke the quiet. So what now? Elias turned, his face grim. The harbinger we sealed was a general, one of many. The obelisk warned us of their kind, the Eternals. If they are waking, the gateways will start opening across the globe. We've just delayed the inevitable. Seth looked up, his jaw tight. Then we prepare. Layla frowned. Prepare for what? Seth's eyes burned with determination. War. That night, as Seth drifted into uneasy sleep, the whispers returned, not chaotic, but focused. A single voice echoed in his mind. We are coming, Seth Omori. He woke with a start, the shard in his hand pulsing faintly. The symbols reappeared, new ones this time, glowing on its surface. Layla entered the room, her expression tense. What is it? Seth stared at the shard, realization dawning. They sent us a message. Elias appeared in the doorway, looking shaken. And? Seth's voice was calm, steady. They're calling us to a final battlefield. The last gateway. The place where this all began. Layla's eyes widened. Where? Seth turned to the window, gazing out at the horizon. Egypt. The desert sands of Egypt stretched endlessly under the pale light of the moon. Seth Omori stood at the edge of the plateau, the faint glow of the shard pulsing in his hand, guiding him forward. Layla and Elias approached cautiously, their footsteps muffled in the sand. Layla broke the silence. This is where it all began, isn't it? Seth nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The harbingers chose Egypt as their first foothold on Earth. The pyramids were more than tombs, they were warnings. Elias adjusted his pack, his voice anxious. And the last gateway lies beneath them. The one connecting Earth to the Eternal's prison in the stars. Layla glanced at Seth. If we destroy this gateway, will it stop them? Seth's expression was grim. No. It'll trap them here forever. Humanity will have to stand guard for eternity. Elias hesitated. And if we fail? Seth's voice was quiet but resolute. Then Earth becomes theirs. The three of them descended into the shadows of the Great Pyramid. Beneath its ancient facade, hidden chambers awaited them, sealed for millennia. The shard grew brighter, revealing symbols etched deep into the walls. The whispers returned, louder now, invasive. The hour of reckoning has come. The descent was treacherous. Dust and stale air choked them as they moved deeper underground, the shard guiding their path. At last, they entered a vast chamber, a cathedral of alien architecture woven with ancient Egyptian design. At its center stood the last gateway, a monolithic ring of obsidian, humming with unnatural energy. Elias whispered in awe, "It's active." The gateway shimmered, its surface rippling like liquid obsidian. From its depths, figures began to emerge, harbingers. Shadows, formless but terrifying, spilling into the chamber. Layla gripped Seth's arm. We're too late. Seth shook his head, stepping forward. Not yet. He raised the shard, its light blazing as the harbingers shrieked, recoiling. The gateway quivered, its surface destabilizing. A booming voice filled the chamber, shaking the ground. You dare defy us? We are infinite. We are eternal. From the shadows, a monstrous figure emerged. The Harbinger Prime, taller and darker than the others, its form coalescing into something almost human. Its eyes burned with a sickly light. Seth felt its presence push into his mind, seeking to tear through his defenses. He gritted his teeth. You've manipulated us for long enough. This ends here. The Harbinger Prime's voice echoed like thunder. You are but dust. Your kind was made to serve. The other Harbingers surged forward, screeching. Seth turned to Layla and Elias. Hold them back. I'll destroy the gateway. Layla lit makeshift explosives, tossing them at the advancing Harbingers. Each blast slowed their approach, but the shadows reformed just as quickly. Elias, armed with nothing but a broken staff and his wits, frantically activated alien mechanisms etched into the walls, flooding parts of the chamber with burning light that kept the creatures at bay. Seth, Layla shouted. We can't hold them forever. At the gateway, Seth pressed the shard into the obsidian ring. Its glow battled against the dark energy, light and shadow clashing violently. The Harbinger Prime loomed closer, its voice resonating in Seth's mind. You think your mortal will can undo eons of our design? We shaped your ancestors. We gave them knowledge. And now we shall claim your world. Seth shouted back, the shard flaring brighter. You didn't give us anything we can't take back. The obsidian gateway cracked, its surface rippling as the shard's energy spread. The Harbinger Prime roared, its form shuddering as the light burned through it. As the gateway began to destabilize, Seth realized the truth, simply breaking the gateway wouldn't stop the Harbingers. Their essence was already spilling through, destroying it now would leave Earth vulnerable to their full force. There was only one way to end it. He turned to Layla and Elias, his voice strained. I can seal it from the other side. Layla froze, horror dawning on her face. No. Seth, you'll be trapped. Elias shouted, there has to be another way. The Harbinger Prime's form faltered, its voice weakened. You cannot win, not without sacrifice. Seth stepped closer to the gateway, the shard pulsing like a heartbeat in his palm. This is my choice. Layla ran toward him, tears streaming down her face. Seth, don't you dare. But Seth turned, his gaze steady. The world needs a guardian, Layla. Someone to make sure they can never come back. Before she could stop him, Seth stepped through the gateway. The light consumed him, and with a final push of will, he drove the shard into its core. The gateway imploded. The chamber shook as the obsidian ring fractured, collapsing into itself. The Harbingers screamed, their forms disintegrating into smoke and light. Layla and Elias dove for cover as debris rained from above. And then, silence. When the dust settled, the gateway was gone. The room was still, empty except for a faint glow where the shard had fallen. Layla staggered to her feet, staring at the spot where Seth had disappeared. Her voice was barely a whisper. He's gone. Elias stood beside her, his face pale and grief-stricken. He saved us. He saved the world. Layla picked up the shard, now dark and lifeless. And he's alone. Out there. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll find him. We owe him that. Weeks later, the world began to heal. The gateways were silent, the Harbingers banished. Humanity rebuilt, unaware of how close they had come to annihilation. But Layla couldn't rest. She stood at the Great Pyramid once more, the shard clutched tightly in her hand. Elias joined her, scanning the horizon. You really think we can find him? Layla's eyes burned with determination. I know we can. Seth isn't gone. The gateway didn't destroy him, it transported him. He's out there, somewhere, and I'm not stopping until I bring him back. Elias nodded, a faint smile on his lips. Then let's get to work. As they walked into the desert, the shard began to glow faintly once more, pulsing like a heartbeat. Far beyond the stars, in the realm of the Harbingers, Seth Omori stood alone, staring at a vast, alien landscape. The whispers were gone, replaced by a silence that felt endless. He held the shard in his hand, its light guiding him forward. You wanted a guardian, Seth murmured to the emptiness. You've got one. The darkness shifted, and Seth stepped toward it, ready for whatever came next.